The Marine thought the K-9 was trying to escape until the German Shepherd jumped into water cold enough to stop a man's breath. At 6:18 on a January morning, Pine Harbor, Michigan, lay beneath a hard blue darkness. The temperature had fallen to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind pushed loose snow across the frozen marina in thin white ribbons. Staff Sergeant Jack Holloway came to inspect a split water line near the old boathouse, carrying a flashlight, a tool bag, and the habit of noticing what other people overlooked. At the end of the longest dock, something moved beside a wooden post. A German Shepherd stood tied there with a length of wet rope. Sable fur clung to his ribs. Ice had formed along the lower edge of his black working collar. He did not bark when Jack approached. He did not pull toward shore. His amber eyes remained fixed on a narrow break in the ice beneath the boathouse. Jack set down the tools. "Easy, partner." The dog glanced at him once, then returned his attention to the water. The rope had frozen stiff around the post. Jack used a utility knife to cut through it, keeping one hand near the collar. The moment the final strand gave way, the shepherd lunged past him and jumped. Black water closed around the dog. Jack dropped to one knee at the dock edge. "No, come back." The shepherd surfaced several feet away, fighting through floating ice toward the shadow beneath the boathouse. Jack grabbed the loose rope, looped it beneath the dog's chest when he came close enough, and pulled steadily until front paws struck the lower ladder. The shepherd climbed onto the dock, water streaming from his coat, breath rising in quick white clouds. Jack wrapped his field jacket around him. "You do that again, and neither of us is having a good morning." The dog shook once, stepped away from the jacket, and returned to the same spot. He stared into the water, calm, focused, not confused. Jack had worked beside military K-9 teams long enough to recognize the difference between panic and purpose. "You are not trying to run," he said. The shepherd lowered his head and scratched at the snow near the dock post. Something blue appeared beneath the powder. Jack brushed it free. A child-sized wool glove. Dark blue, soaked at the fingertips, with the name Noah stitched across the cuff. The dog touched it with his nose, then looked toward the boathouse. Jack examined the collar. A worn brass plate carried one word: Ranger. Beneath it was a faded K-9 unit mark and a telephone number scratched nearly smooth. Jack called. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. Wind pushed against the dock, making the old boards complain beneath his boots. Ranger moved 3 steps toward a section of planking marked by fresh white paint. He scratched once, then looked back at Jack. Beneath the snow were long drag marks leading from the boathouse wall toward the water. Jack crouched and placed one ear near the boards. At first he heard only wind, water, and ice rubbing against the pilings. Then came a sound from below. 3 faint knocks. Silence. 3 more. Ranger pressed his ear to the same place and gave one low whine. Jack stood immediately and called Deputy Sarah Collins, then County Lake Rescue. "Possible person trapped beneath the east boathouse," he said. "Bring cold water gear." He secured Ranger with a spare lead from his truck, but the dog pulled toward the water again. Jack followed his gaze through a gap between the boards. Far beneath the structure, a weak amber light blinked once and disappeared. A small cabin boat was wedged between the pilings, almost hidden in shadow. Ranger gathered himself to jump a second time. Jack caught the collar before he could leave the dock. "Not alone," he said. He tied a safety line around his own waist, clipped the other end to the dock rail, and lowered himself toward the rescue ladder. The black water waited below, carrying memories Jack had spent years refusing to touch. Ranger stood above him, eyes fixed on the trapped boat. Jack tightened his grip on the rope. "Show me." The dog leaned over the edge and looked toward the faint light. From inside the hidden cabin came another soft knock. Jack descended one rung at a time, boots finding the metal steps beneath a skin of ice. The safety line tightened against his waist as the wind pushed through the open frame of the boathouse. Above him, Ranger stood at the edge of the dock, body still, ears forward, every part of him aimed at the trapped cabin boat. Jack lowered the flashlight and swept the beam across the water. The boat had drifted sideways beneath the structure and become wedged between 2 pilings. Its stern sat low, but the cabin remained above the waterline. One window was fogged from the inside. "Noah," Jack called. "My name is Jack Holloway. I am here to help you." For several seconds, there was nothing. Then the faintest answer came through the glass. "Ranger." The dog gave a sharp bark, the first sound Jack had heard from him. Inside the cabin, something moved. Jack felt the old pressure gather behind his ribs. Years earlier, another voice had called through freezing wind while orders held him in place. He had obeyed. He had carried that obedience like a stone ever since. This time, no one was telling him to turn back. Deputy Sarah Collins arrived at the head of the dock with 2 emergency blankets and a portable radio. Behind her, the county lake rescue truck rolled into the marina lot, amber lights reflecting across the snow. "What do you have?" she called. One person inside the cabin. Conscious, weak voice. "Boat is pinned between the pilings." Sarah looked at Ranger. And him. He found the boat. Ranger pulled once against the spare lead, then sat when Jack raised a hand. Trained. Waiting. The rescue team moved quickly without rushing. One technician secured a second line to the dock. Another lowered a flat rescue platform beside Jack. The cold made every buckle stiff and every breath visible. Jack reached the side of the boat and tested the cabin door. It moved less than an inch. A broken section of dock railing had fallen against it, trapping it shut. "Noah, move away from the door," Jack said. A weak tap answered from inside. Jack and the technician lifted the railing together and guided it aside. The wood scraped across the hull, then floated free. Jack pulled the handle. The door opened halfway before catching on a loose life jacket. Warm, damp air touched his face. Noah Pierce lay wrapped in an old wool blanket near the rear bench, pale but awake. A flashlight rested beside him, its battery fading. His right hand still held the mate to the blue glove Jack had found on the dock. "You came back," Noah whispered. He was not looking at Jack. He was looking over Jack's shoulder. Ranger had moved to the lower ladder, front paws on the last dry rung, straining to see into the cabin. Jack turned. He never stopped trying. Noah closed his eyes for 1 second, relief passing across his face like sunlight through cloud. The rescue team placed a thermal wrap around him and helped him onto the platform. Ranger remained perfectly still until Noah was lifted beside the dock. Then the dog leaned forward and touched his nose to the boy's covered hand. Noah opened his fingers and rested them against Ranger's muzzle. "Good boy," he said. "You finished it." Jack looked at the rope still trailing from Ranger's collar, then at the cut end tied to the post above. The dog had not been abandoned at the dock. He had been stopped there. Someone had mistaken urgency for danger and loyalty for panic. As the team carried Noah toward the ambulance, Ranger tried to follow, but his legs trembled from the cold. Jack removed his field jacket and wrapped it around the shepherd again. This time, Ranger did not step away. He leaned against Jack's knee, still watching Noah until the ambulance doors closed. Sarah came beside them and held up her phone. "The number on the collar belongs to Thomas Pierce, Noah's father. He has been searching the North Shore since midnight." Jack nodded, but Ranger's attention shifted back toward the boathouse. Beneath the dock, the severed anchor line rose and fell with the dark water. Jack followed the dog's gaze and understood there was more to the story than the trapped boat. Ranger had not simply found help. He had traveled through the storm, returned to the same place, and kept returning even after someone tied him down. Jack placed one hand on the dog's wet shoulder. "Let us find out how many times you came back." The ambulance disappeared beyond the marina gates, leaving red light fading across the snow. Jack carried Ranger toward his truck, one arm beneath the dog's chest and the other supporting his hind legs. The German shepherd did not resist. His wet coat smelled of lake water, old leather, and cold iron. Deputy Sarah Collins opened the passenger door, spread an emergency blanket across the seat, and helped Jack settle him inside. Ranger remained upright for several seconds, watching the road where Noah had gone, then lowered his head onto the folded edge of Jack's field jacket. "He is still on duty," Sarah said. Jack looked at the worn collar and the rope trailing from it. "Then we need to learn what his duty looked like before we found him." Warren Hale, the marina manager, stood beneath the yellow light outside the office. He was in his late 60s, wearing insulated coveralls and a knitted cap pulled low over his ears. His face changed when he saw Ranger through the truck window. "That dog made it," he said quietly. Jack stepped closer. "You tied him to the dock." Warren removed his gloves and held them between both hands. "I thought I was keeping him safe." He explained that Ranger had appeared shortly after midnight, soaked and limping, carrying a blue glove. The dog ran to the end of the dock, jumped into the water, climbed back out, and raced toward the office. Warren followed, but Ranger returned to the same place and tried again. I called the county line, Warren said. They told me to keep him contained until someone arrived. I did not know there was a boat under there. Jack studied him. There was no cruelty in the man's voice. Only the heavy sound of someone realizing that caution had almost become a locked door. How many times did he come back? Jack asked. Warren looked toward the boathouse. 3 that I saw. He led them inside the marina office. Security monitors glowed above a cluttered desk. Sarah rewound the overnight footage. At 11:47, Ranger appeared through blowing snow, moving slowly but with purpose. He placed the glove at the office door and barked once. When no one came, he ran back toward the dock. At 12:23, he returned, dragging a length of broken anchor line. At 1:16, he came again, stood beneath the camera, and looked directly toward the door before disappearing into the storm. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. 3 trips through freezing wind. 3 signals. No one had understood. Warren sat down hard in the desk chair. I tied him at 2 o'clock. Sarah paused the recording on Ranger standing beside the post, eyes fixed on the dark water. You were trying to stop him from drowning. Yes. Warren rubbed his forehead. But he was trying to stop that boy from being forgotten. Jack said nothing. He knew how easily fear could disguise itself as good judgment. He had lived inside that disguise for years. At Pine Harbor Veterinary Clinic, Dr. Megan Brooks warmed Ranger beneath heated blankets and checked his breathing, pause, and heart. He is exhausted, she said, but he is stronger than he looks. She turned the collar beneath the light. A faded metal plate showed Ranger's name, an old search and rescue designation, and Thomas Pierce's number. He was trained, Megan said. Not recently. Deeply. Jack stood beside the table while Ranger slept. His paws moved once beneath the blanket, as though he were still running through snow. Jack placed the blue glove near his nose. Ranger's breathing eased. Sarah entered with her phone pressed to her coat. Noah is stable. His father is on the way to the hospital. She lowered her voice. Noah told the paramedic he sent Ranger through a ventilation hatch with the glove and one command. Jack looked at her. Sarah repeated it softly. Find someone. Come back. Ranger opened his eyes at the sound of Noah's name. He lifted his head, searched the room, and tried to stand. Jack rested a hand against his shoulder. He is safe, he said. You did what he asked. The dog watched him, uncertain for one long second, then lowered his head onto Jack's wrist. Outside, morning light spread across the frozen harbor. Inside the clinic, Jack understood that Ranger had not returned 3 times because he failed. He had returned because no answer was good enough until someone followed. By late morning, the storm had weakened to a steady drift of fine snow against the clinic windows. Ranger remained beneath the heated blanket, but his eyes followed every sound from the hallway. Jack sat beside the examination table with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. The blue glove rested near Ranger's collar. Its wool was drying now, the stitched name dark against the fabric. Dr. Megan Brooks checked the dog's temperature again, then nodded. He can leave this afternoon if he stays warm and quiet. Jack looked toward the door. His family will take him. Megan hesitated. Maybe. Sarah called from the hospital. Thomas Pierce wants to speak with you first. An hour later, Thomas arrived wearing a winter coat over yesterday's clothes. He looked like a man who had been moving without rest since the night before. Snow clung to his shoulders. He crossed the room quickly, then stopped beside Ranger as though afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too fast. Ranger raised his head. Thomas placed one hand against the dog's neck. You found him, he whispered. Ranger leaned into the touch, but his eyes shifted toward the hallway, still searching for Noah. Thomas noticed. He is awake. He is asking for you. The dog tried to stand. Jack steadied him. Thomas gave a tired smile. That is Ranger. Retirement never meant much to him. He explained that Ranger had spent 6 years with a volunteer search and rescue team across northern Michigan. He had located hikers, children, and 2 elderly men who wandered from home during winter storms. When arthritis began to slow him, Thomas adopted him. Noah was 13 then, quiet after losing his mother, and Ranger chose the boy almost immediately. They slept in the same room, walked the same trails, sat together on the dock every evening. The lake was calm. Noah is the only person he still works for, Thomas said. Not because anyone trained him to, because he decided to. Jack looked at the worn unit plate. Why were they on the boat last night? Thomas lowered his gaze. Noah had gone to secure the cabin boat before the storm worsened. The anchor line snapped sooner than expected, and the boat drifted beneath the boathouse. The radio battery failed. Noah stayed inside, conserving heat, until he realized no one could see the boat from shore. He opened the small ventilation hatch and sent Ranger out with the glove. He told him to find someone and come back, Thomas said. He knew Ranger would understand. Jack felt the old memory return, not as a picture, but as cold pressure behind his ribs. A mountain road overseas. White wind. A voice over the radio asking for another minute. The order to move. Jack had obeyed because 5 other Marines depended on him. Still, one name had remained with him longer than any medal or commendation. Thomas studied him. Sarah said you went under the dock. The rescue team did the work. You heard him first. Jack shook his head. Ranger did. The dog lifted his ears at his name. Thomas looked from Ranger to Jack and seemed to understand something Jack had not said. Sometimes the hardest part is not going back, he said. It is believing you are allowed to. The room became quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Jack stared at the glove. There are times when you are not. Then maybe this was not one of those times. That afternoon, the hospital allowed Noah to speak through a video call. Sarah held the phone near his bed. His face was pale, but his smile appeared the moment Ranger heard his voice. Hey, old man, Noah said. Ranger pushed himself upright and touched his nose to the screen. Noah laughed softly. You finished the job. Jack turned away for a second, pretending to adjust the blanket. Ranger settled only when Noah promised he would be home soon. After the call ended, Thomas remained by the window. We are moving to Arizona next month, he said. Noah needs the dry air, and my sister has a place near Tucson. Jack glanced at Ranger's thick sable coat. Thomas nodded. That is the problem. Ranger struggles in heat, and he hates long travel. I have been trying to find someone he would trust. Ranger stepped down carefully from the table, crossed the room, and stopped beside Jack. Then he sat against Jack's boot. Thomas watched them both. Maybe he already has. Jack did not answer Thomas right away. Outside the clinic, late afternoon light turned the snow pale gold, and the wind had finally lost its edge. Ranger remained seated against Jack's boot, warm now, steady now, as though the place beside him had already been decided. Jack looked down at the German shepherd and felt the old instinct to step away before anything could need him. It had kept his house quiet. It had kept his days orderly. It had also kept every room colder than it needed to be. He has a family, Jack said. Thomas nodded. He does. That is why I am asking carefully. Ranger lifted his head when Thomas spoke, then looked back at Jack. Dr. Megan Brooks handed Jack a folded discharge sheet and a small bag of medication. He needs rest, short walks, and no cold water for a while. Jack glanced at the dog. You hear that? Ranger blinked once. Thomas gave the first real laugh Jack had heard from him. He has always considered medical advice a suggestion. They left the clinic together. Thomas opened the rear door of his sport utility vehicle, but Ranger walked past it. He crossed the snowy parking lot slowly and stopped beside Jack's old pickup truck. The passenger door was closed. Ranger sat beneath it and waited. Jack stood several feet away, holding the blue glove, while Thomas watched without speaking. The truck had carried tools, spare rope, coffee cups, and silence for years. No one used the passenger seat. Jack had stopped clearing it after he left the Marines. Now Ranger rested his chin near the door handle, as if he had been assigned there long ago. This is not a decision, Jack said. Thomas placed both hands in his coat pockets. No, it is only a ride. Jack opened the door. Ranger climbed onto the seat carefully, turned once on the blanket Sarah had left there, and settled beside the window. The brass tag on his collar touched the dashboard with a soft click. Jack drove Thomas to the hospital first. Ranger watched every passing car, ears forward, until they reached the covered entrance. Noah was not allowed outside yet, so Sarah brought him to a ground-floor window in a wheelchair. Jack parked close enough for Ranger to see through the glass. The dog rose immediately. Noah pressed one palm to the window. Ranger placed one paw against the inside of the truck door. For a moment, the glass held them apart, but neither seemed troubled by it. They had already crossed something colder. Noah smiled and mouthed 2 words. Good boy. Ranger's tail moved once against the seat. Thomas stood beside the truck, eyes wet in the fading light. He will wait for Noah as long as he has to, he said. Jack looked at the boy beyond the glass. That kind of waiting can wear a dog down. It can wear a man down too. They drove back to Thomas's house near the North Shore. Ranger moved through the familiar rooms, checking Noah's bedroom, the kitchen, and the back door. He found Noah's boots beside the mudroom bench and lay down with his nose against them. Jack stood in the doorway. The house carried the smell of cedar, coffee, and the kind of family life he had spent years avoiding because it reminded him what could be lost. Thomas placed Ranger's old working harness on the table. Its reflective lettering was faded, but the handle remained polished from use. He retired 3 years ago, Thomas said. Noah gave him another purpose. Jack ran one thumb along the edge of the harness. And when Noah leaves? That is what I am afraid of. That evening, Jack returned to his small house alone. He set the blue glove on the kitchen table and listened to the refrigerator hum. The passenger seat of his truck was empty again, but a few sable hairs remained on the blanket. He told himself Thomas would find someone better. Someone with a fenced yard. Someone who had not spent years turning every memory into a locked room. Then the telephone rang. It was the hospital. Noah's voice came softly through the speaker. "Mr. Holloway, my dad said Ranger sat by your truck." Jack looked through the window toward the dark driveway. He was tired. Noah paused. Ranger does not sit beside people because he is tired. Jack closed his eyes. The boy continued. He sits beside them when he thinks they might need him. Jack remained beside the kitchen window long after the call ended. Snow rested on the hood of his truck, softening every hard line. The blue glove lay on the table beneath the yellow light. Noah's words stayed with him. Ranger does not sit beside people because he is tired. He sits beside them when he thinks they might need him. Jack had spent years believing need was a kind of danger. Need created promises. Promises created names you carried after everyone else went home. He picked up the glove and turned it over in his hands. The wool still smelled faintly of lake water and smoke from the marina heater. At 7 the next morning, Jack drove to Thomas Pierce's house. Ranger was already waiting behind the front window. The moment Jack stepped from the truck, the German Shepherd disappeared from view and reached the door before Thomas could open it. "He heard your engine," Thomas said. Ranger walked straight to the passenger side of the pickup and sat. Jack looked at the empty seat through the glass. "You are making this difficult." Ranger tilted his head. Thomas handed Jack the old working harness. "Noah wants you to keep this, even if the arrangement is temporary." Jack ran his fingers over the faded reflective letters. Temporary sounds safer. It usually does. They drove to the hospital together. Ranger sat upright on the passenger seat, the harness folded beneath one paw. At the entrance, a nurse brought Noah outside in a wheelchair, wrapped in a navy blanket. His face had more color now. When Ranger saw him, he gave one quiet sound and stepped carefully from the truck. Noah opened both arms. The dog leaned against him with surprising gentleness, pressing his head beneath the boy's chin. No one spoke for several seconds. Wind moved through the bare trees. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, a church bell marked the hour. Noah held Ranger's collar and whispered, "You came back every time." Ranger closed his eyes. Jack looked away toward the road, but Thomas stood beside him. "You do not have to pretend this does not reach you," Thomas said. Jack breathed out slowly. There was a Marine named Daniel Mercer. He was 24. Winter operation. Bad visibility. We received an order to move before I could return to his position. Thomas did not interrupt. 5 men came home because I followed that order, Jack continued. One did not. Everyone told me I made the right decision. I never learned how to believe them. Thomas watched Ranger with Noah. Maybe right and painless were never the same thing. Jack said nothing. Noah looked up from the wheelchair. "Mr. Holloway, Ranger knows when someone is missing." Jack met the boy's eyes. "He found you. I think he found you too." The words were simple. That made them harder to avoid. Later, Jack drove Ranger to the marina. The dock had been cleared, and the cabin boat had been moved to shore. Warren Hale stood near the office holding the cut length of frozen rope. He approached slowly. "I wanted to apologize." Ranger remained beside Jack, calm and watchful. Warren lowered the rope. "I thought tying him down was the safe thing." Jack looked toward the dark opening beneath the boathouse. Fear can look responsible when it is wearing the right clothes. Warren nodded. Together, they installed a weatherproof rescue box at the end of the dock. Inside went thermal blankets, a flashlight, a life ring, a charged radio, a first aid kit, and 200 feet of bright orange rope. Jack placed Noah's blue glove inside a clear frame on the inner lid. Beneath it, he wrote a single sentence. Listen before you assume. Ranger watched from the planks, ears raised toward the lake. When the work was finished, Jack opened the passenger door of his truck. This time, he did not call the dog. Ranger climbed in, turned once, and settled beside him. The brass tag clicked against the dashboard. Jack placed one hand on the steering wheel and the other briefly against Ranger's shoulder. All right, he said. You can stay until we figure out what comes next. Ranger rested his head near Jack's arm. Outside, the frozen harbor shone beneath a clear winter sky. For the first time in years, the passenger seat no longer looked like an empty place. It looked like someone had finally come home. The first week with Ranger changed Jack's house in small, quiet ways. A metal water bowl appeared beside the back door. A folded blanket covered the floor near the wood stove. The morning silence was replaced by nails tapping across pine boards and the soft rattle of a brass tag whenever Ranger lifted his head. Jack told himself the arrangement remained temporary. He repeated it while measuring food into the bowl. He repeated it while clearing a place in the truck. He repeated it while Ranger slept within reach of the kitchen table, one ear raised whenever Jack moved. Temporary became harder to believe each day. Noah returned home from the hospital on Friday afternoon. Jack drove Ranger to the Pierce house before the family arrived. The dog waited at the front gate, standing so still that snow gathered along his back. When Thomas's vehicle turned onto the road, Ranger stepped forward but did not pull. He watched. He listened. The passenger door opened, and Noah emerged slowly with Thomas beside him. Ranger crossed the yard at a careful walk. No rushing. No jumping. He stopped inches away and lowered his head beneath Noah's hand. Noah bent over him, pressing his face into the sable fur. I knew you would wait, he whispered. Ranger's tail brushed the snow once. Jack stood near the truck, giving them room. Thomas came beside him. Noah leaves for Arizona in 3 weeks. Jack nodded. Ranger knows something is changing. He always does. Thomas handed Jack a worn leather folder. Inside were Ranger's veterinary records, retirement papers, search and rescue certifications, and a photograph of the dog at 4 years old wearing his working harness beside a younger Noah. On the final page was a transfer form. The new owner line remained blank. Jack closed the folder. You are moving quickly. Thomas looked toward his son and the dog. I have been moving slowly for months. Ranger made the decision faster than I did. That evening, Noah asked Jack to walk with him and Ranger along the frozen shoreline. They moved carefully, following a path of packed snow beneath bare maple trees. Ranger stayed between them, matching Noah's slower pace. The lake was quiet except for distant ice shifting beneath the surface. Noah kept both hands in his coat pockets. My father says you were a Marine. I was. Ranger likes people who listen before they speak. Jack glanced down at the dog. That leaves me in a difficult position. Noah smiled. Then his expression softened. He will look for me after we leave. Probably. Do not let him think I disappeared. Jack stopped walking. Ranger stopped too. Noah reached into his pocket and removed the dry blue glove. The hospital had returned it after the rescue. Keep this where he can smell it, Noah said. Not because he needs to find me. Because he needs to know I am safe. Jack took the glove. Its wool was clean now, but the stitched name remained slightly faded from the lake. You trust me with him? Noah looked directly at him. He trusted you first. The words settled into the cold air. Jack had received orders, commendations, and responsibilities that carried more official weight. None had felt heavier than that sentence. 2 days later, Jack brought Ranger back to the marina for a short walk. Warren Hale had replaced the damaged railing and mounted a new warning light near the boathouse. The rescue box stood at the end of the dock, bright against the weathered boards. Ranger approached the place where he had been tied and stopped. Jack watched his breathing change. Not panic. Memory. The dog looked toward the water, then back at Jack. Jack rested one hand on his shoulder. No one is trapped today. Ranger remained still for several seconds before turning away from the edge. They walked to the rescue box together. Jack opened the lid and placed Noah's glove beside the framed one, then closed it again. On the way back, Ranger did not look behind him. At sunset, Jack sat at his kitchen table with the transfer form in front of him. Ranger lay near the stove, the old harness beside his paws. Jack filled in his name slowly. When the pen reached the final line, Ranger lifted his head. Jack signed. The brass tag gave a quiet sound as the dog stood and crossed the room. He rested his chin on Jack's knee. Jack placed the folder aside and touched the gray beginning to show around Ranger's muzzle. "I suppose Temporary had a good run," he said. Ranger closed his eyes, and for once, Jack did not feel that accepting responsibility meant preparing to lose something. It felt like choosing to stay. 3 weeks later, the morning Noah left for Arizona arrived beneath a soft gray sky. The snow had begun to melt along the edges of the pierced driveway, revealing dark patches of earth beneath the trees. Ranger stood beside Jack's truck wearing his old working harness, the faded reflective letters catching what little light the day offered. He watched Thomas load the final suitcase into the back of the sport utility vehicle. Noah came out last, moving more easily now, though he still paused before each step as if the cold had taught his body to be careful. Ranger walked to him and sat. Noah lowered himself onto the porch step. For several minutes, neither moved. Jack remained near the truck, holding the signed transfer folder beneath one arm. Thomas gave him a quiet nod, but did not speak. Some goodbyes became smaller when too many words were placed around them. Noah removed the blue glove from his coat pocket. It was the matching glove, the one he had kept after the rescue. He held it near Ranger's nose, then tucked it beneath the strap of the harness. "You do not have to find me this time," he said. Ranger looked into the boy's face. Noah swallowed. "You already know where I am." The dog leaned forward and rested his head against Noah's chest. Noah closed both arms around him. Jack looked toward the lake beyond the trees. The surface had begun to loosen near shore, and thin pieces of ice touched one another with a sound like distant glass. He remembered believing that leaving always meant abandonment. He understood now that some people left because life asked them to keep moving. Love was not measured only by who stayed. Sometimes it was measured by whether the one remaining kept the door open. Thomas walked over and handed Jack a small metal whistle. "Ranger's original recall whistle," he said. "Noah used it when they trained near the shoreline." Jack turned it in his palm. The metal was scratched and dull. "Does he still respond?" "Only when he believes the person calling matters." Jack looked at Ranger. "That sounds inconvenient." Thomas smiled. "You will understand each other." When the vehicle finally pulled away, Ranger followed it to the end of the driveway. He stopped at the road and watched until the taillights disappeared beyond the bend. Jack did not call him back. He stood several feet behind and waited. The dog remained there for a long time, the blue glove secured against his harness, ears raised toward an engine he could no longer hear. Then he turned. He walked past the empty Pierce house and came directly to Jack. No hesitation. No searching. Jack opened the passenger door. Ranger climbed inside and placed one paw on the dashboard. The brass tag clicked once against the glass. On the drive home, Jack took the longer road around Pine Harbor. Ranger watched the lake through the window, calm but alert. When they reached the marina, Deputy Sarah Collins was standing near the rescue box with Warren Hale and Dr. Megan Brooks. A new sign had been mounted beside it. "Emergency Lake Response Station." Sarah held out a set of keys. "The county approved the volunteer program," she said. "We need someone who knows the docks, the weather, and when not to ignore a dog." Jack looked at the keys, then at Ranger. "That is a narrow job description." It was written that way on purpose. By spring, Jack and Ranger trained twice each week with the county team. Ranger no longer entered cold water, but he worked the shoreline, located dropped equipment, and demonstrated search patterns for younger dogs. Jack repaired radios, inspected ropes, and taught volunteers how to read weather before stepping onto a dock. They were not trying to become heroes. They were trying to arrive before hope became silence. One evening, after the last training session, Jack found a package waiting on his porch. Inside was a photograph of Noah standing beneath an Arizona sun, one hand raised toward the camera. A note was written on the back. "Tell Ranger I am safe. Tell him he can stop looking behind him." Jack carried the photograph inside and placed it beside the old glove on the kitchen shelf. Ranger sniffed it, then lay down near the door. That night, for the first time since Noah left, he slept with his back toward the road. By the time winter returned to Pine Harbor, Ranger had learned the sound of Jack's life. He knew the truck before it turned into the driveway. He knew which cabinet held the treats and which boots meant a short walk instead of a late call. He knew that Jack still woke some nights and stood by the kitchen window without turning on a light. On those nights, Ranger crossed the dark room, rested against his leg, and waited until the old memories loosened their grip. The volunteer station had become part of the town. Fishermen checked the rescue box before heading onto the ice. Parents pointed out the bright orange rope to their children. Warren inspected the batteries every Monday morning. Sarah kept the radio charged. Megan donated thermal pads and paw wraps. Inside the lid, Noah's blue glove remained behind clear plastic, faded now but visible beneath the words Jack had written. Listen before you assume. In early January, a light snow began falling just before dawn. Jack and Ranger arrived at the marina to inspect the dock after a night of strong wind. The lake was mostly frozen, though a narrow channel of black water remained near the pilings. Ranger moved slowly along the boards, gray showing around his muzzle, his old harness fitted comfortably across his shoulders. At the place where he had once been tied, he stopped. Jack expected him to look toward the boathouse. Instead, Ranger turned toward the north dock and raised one ear. "What is it?" Jack asked. The dog listened. Wind moved over the snow. A loose chain tapped against a metal post. Nothing else. Ranger walked 10 yards, stopped beside a stack of covered canoes, and looked back. Jack followed. Beneath the canvas came a soft, scratching sound. Not urgent. Weak. Ranger lowered his nose to a gap near the ground. Jack lifted one corner of the cover and found a small terrier tucked between two overturned boats, shivering but alert. A red leash trailed from its collar. "All right," Jack said softly. "We found you." Ranger laid down beside the opening while Jack wrapped the little dog in a thermal blanket. Sarah arrived minutes later and checked nearby houses. The terrier belonged to an elderly woman 2 blocks from the marina. Her back gate had blown open during the night. By breakfast, the dog was home, warm and sleeping beside her chair. The rescue would never make the evening news. No helicopter came. No crowd gathered. It was only a small life heard beneath the sound of weather. That afternoon, Jack returned to the dock with Ranger. The sky had cleared, leaving the lake silver beneath winter sunlight. He opened the rescue box to replace the blanket. Inside was a new photograph mailed from Arizona. Noah stood beside a desert trail, taller now, smiling beneath a wide blue sky. On the back, he had written that he planned to study emergency medicine after graduation. Beneath that was one more line. "I learned from Ranger that finding help is not enough. You have to keep trying until someone listens." Jack placed the photograph beside the glove. Ranger sniffed it and wagged his tail once. They remained at the end of the dock as evening settled over Pine Harbor. The same pilings stood beneath them. The same cold water moved below. But Jack no longer felt trapped between an order he had followed and a man he could not bring home. He had finally understood that regret did not ask him to live forever in the past. It asked him to notice who was still calling in the present. Ranger walked to the edge and listened to the lake. Jack stood beside him with the orange rescue rope over one shoulder. After a moment, the dog looked up. Jack smiled. "Nothing today." Ranger leaned gently against his leg. In the distance, church bells marked 5 o'clock. Lights came on along the harbor road, one window at a time. Jack closed the rescue box and rested a hand on Ranger's back. They turned toward the truck together. The passenger door waited open, the seat covered with the same blanket Ranger had chosen months before. Before climbing in, the dog looked once more toward the dock where he had refused to stop trying. Then he faced forward. Jack started the engine, and the brass tag touched the dashboard with a quiet, familiar click. Some stories did not end when everyone was saved. They continued in the way one life taught another to listen, to return, and to leave no quiet signal unanswered.